Hi, it's Josh Goldberg here. Today I'm talking about narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD. I will be talking about overt narcissism or covert narcissism. It's a very popular topic on the internet. So why am I making a video about it when there are already hundreds, if not thousands of videos? And the reason is because I think I would be the only Orthodox Jewish person with an Australian accent talking about narcissism, and maybe my explanation, my take on it might give you something different. Okay, so just a disclaimer, I am not a clinical psychologist. I don't diagnose narcissistic personality disorder or any other personality disorders, nor do I treat any specific personality disorders. I am a certified relationship counselor that has real life, successful experience in dealing with narcissistic personality disorder, CPTSD, and borderline personality disorder. So let's get into narcissism. So how is narcissism formed? Okay, according to the most popular psychological theories and the ones that make sense to me, each person has an emotional part and a surface part. Surface behaviors and unconscious part. Okay, the emotions. So when a child has a very difficult childhood and they sustain some form of pain, trauma, or abuse, it could be emotional abuse, it could be objectification, which means that the child is treated like an object, could be an object of glorification, could be an object of parentification, where the child is forced into a position of parenting the parents, or it could be emotional neglect, it could be emotionally abused, growing up in a violent household, anything that produces very strong negative emotions in the child that are too painful for the child to deal with will cause dissociation, which is a separation of the emotional part to the surface part. A disconnection because the child can't deal with these painful emotions, they're just not able to, so they split, they dissociate to not experience this tremendous pain. And the way that they deal with it going forward is to create a false self, which they're able to live through as a defense mechanism to not experience and to deal with that tremendous pain that they are not able to deal with. And then as they grow up into adults, they get used to living through this false self, and it can go on for obviously an entirety of someone's life. If it's successfully established false self, it is an overt narcissist, someone that has established a position in their community and they experience success and they get a good amount of narcissistic supply, then their false self is sustained through this supply and they live through this as just like it's them. And that's why narcissism is very difficult to treat, because you have to get through the false self in order to get to the real self, which is full of pain and toxicity from childhood trauma and abuse. So that's more or less the popular opinion in the psychology world of how narcissism is formed. And the overt narcissist, again, is an establishment of a successful false self, where they're always getting that supply that they need to validate this grandiose self. And the person never has to deal with this emotional pain, and that's an overt narcissist. A covert narcissist, or as it's widely called, I think more correctly, as a vulnerable or a fragile narcissist, is a narcissistic personality that doesn't have a successful supply the whole time. So for example, in an intimate relationship between partners, okay, with a spouse, a narcissist, it's very difficult to constantly have a narcissistic supply in that relationship, because a healthy relationship is about, giving. So the covert narcissist or as I prefer and a lot of others also call it, vulnerable or fragile narcissist, is when the narcissistic personality will actually cycle from grandiose to fragile, and they'll go back around in these circles, which is very confusing for the other person. And when they're not able to get their supply for the false self by being grandiose, they will take on more of a fragile and more of a wounded, more of a victimized state, and get the person to pity them and to want to help them and to feel sorry for them, and they'll get the narcissistic supply that way. And then once they've been built up, they'll cycle back to the grandiose narcissist. Okay, so that's a covert narcissist. It's not that the covert narcissist is like a secret narcissist, because all narcissists are covert. Okay, they're all liars, they're all false, they all use manipulation tactics and magical thinking. Okay, so covert doesn't mean that they're secret, it just means that they operate in more of a mysterious and confusing way. Okay, so again, they cycle between grandiosity and being fragile, and constantly pulling in supply from the other person, whether it be a spouse or a friend or a family member, by cycling between being grandiose, look how good I am, to becoming fragile, help me, my past is so bad, I need your love. And they pull the supply in through being wounded and fragile. And the covert or vulnerable narcissist is a lot more difficult to deal with because it's very confusing. You never know which person you're going to get, the grandiose person or the wounded, fragile, vulnerable person. Whereas the overt narcissist, everyone knows what an overt narcissist is, right? They're the one always looking for praise, looking for grandiosity and authority and gratitude, and the list goes on, right? So that's the brief summary of the formation of narcissism and the difference between covert and overt narcissism. So covert narcissism is a vulnerable, fragile narcissist that cycles between grandiosity and being fragile and vulnerable. And the overt narcissist is a narcissist who has successfully established a false self that has regular narcissistic supply from other people. Okay, so basically a few things about the narcissist now, and then what to look out for, the signs of narcissism, narcissistic personality disorder. So narcissism really is a person that is controlling the story, okay, controlling the narrative of themselves. It's the whole purpose of the narcissist is to make and validate their own story. Okay, narcissists only have internal objects. Okay, so a healthy person has internal and external objects. A psychopath only has external objects, and the narcissist only has internal objects. So they have no contact with external objects. They only interact with themselves, and that's what their purpose is to control their inner world and their inner narrative by basically using other people as part of their story. Narcissists are codependent, which means that they do rely on other people for their supply. So a narcissist is also a codependent. So the narcissistic personality is highly manipulative, okay, and it always involves false truths and lies, okay. Again, both the overt and the covert narcissists are both manipulative personalities. They both tell lies to, get through the day in order to get supply for their false selves, okay. Remember, it's all about this false self to avoid the pain from unresolved trauma and abuse that the child or the person was not able to process and deal with, okay? That's the whole purpose of the narcissistic false self, is to avoid pain, okay? It's a defensive production, it's a defensive idea. That false self is a defensive production. Okay, they make it to avoid the pain within themselves. So it's not so easily treated, as I said before. It is, some people would say, untreatable. There are very highly skilled psychologists that have created methods of treating narcissistic personality disorder, and we'll leave that to them, okay, because it's very tricky to get through the false self in order to get to the emotional part of the person. So what to look out for with dealing with narcissistic personality disorder? Okay, so firstly, sign number 1 out of the 7 key signs is no shame. Okay, the narcissist has no shame. They always rely on pity to get themselves out of the hole that they've dug, okay, because they have no shame. And going along with no shame is the narcissist hates criticism. Okay, if you criticize the narcissist, they will either passively aggressively or aggressively punish you for that. So sign number 1 is no shame. Sign number 2 is magical thinking. Okay, the narcissist has very delusional, magical thinking in order to keep their story going. They also project a lot, which means that they project blame and responsibility onto other people in order to maintain their grandiose self or to maintain the narrative of their own story. So that's sign number 2 is magical thinking. Sign number 3 is arrogance. Okay, the narcissist has an arrogant personality, which means that they will actually belittle others in order to make themselves feel better. Okay, so even the covert narcissist or the vulnerable or fragile narcissist always has an underlying sense of arrogance. Okay, the fragile state is only a ploy in order to get supply. All narcissists have an arrogant undertone, which means that they're not afraid to belittle you in order to make themselves feel better. Sign number 4 is envy. Okay, the narcissist is green with envy of other people that are succeeding or doing well. The narcissist will never offer praise to another person because that doesn't fit with their story. Okay, remember, the narcissist is all about controlling their own narrative, and offering praise to someone else is not part of their story, and the narcissist will envy anyone else that's getting attention or anyone else that's getting gratification or grandiosity. The narcissist is very envious. Number 5, the 5th sign is entitlement. Okay, all narcissists, covert and overt narcissists, have a very strong feeling of entitlement, which means that if there's another person in the room that also has a sense of entitlement, or they have authority, or they have a high position, that person will be a threat to the narcissist. Even if they're not posing any threat, the narcissist will feel threatened by this other person because the narcissist's own story means that they need to feel a sense of entitlement. Both covert and overt narcissists have a very high feeling of entitlement. Okay, so sign number 6 of the narcissist is exploitative behavior. Okay, all narcissists are exploitative because they're trying to take supply from you for their own false self. Okay, so the way that they do that is through exploitative behavior. The narcissist only deals in vertical transactions, which means that there's always a winner and a loser. There's no fair transactions with a narcissist, and part of their getting supply is that I have to win and the other person has to lose. Okay, so a lot of exploitative behavior, a lot of lying, a lot of manipulation. I actually made a video on reverse communication and the false self. I will put a link in the description of this video. I recommend that you go watch that. It explains the manipulative tactics of communication that the narcissists use. It's called reverse communication, and it's the way that they manipulate other people in order to get supply and to validate their false self that they live through. Okay, so the last sign of the 7 key signs of a narcissist is no boundaries. Okay, the narcissist, like I said before, only has internal objects. So they don't have any boundaries, which means that they will cross your psychological and emotional boundaries to make decisions for you. They will try and force boundaries on you, okay? They'll try and set your boundaries. They have no respect for people's personal and psychological boundaries, which is how they try to manipulate people, by crossing their boundaries, making decisions for them. And they can do it through very subtle ways or very overt ways. And this is how the narcissist gains supply from people. And this is the 7 key signs that you are dealing with a overt or a covert narcissist. If you are connecting with any of this material, if you think that you may be involved with a narcissist, whether a covert or an overt narcissist, in your workplace or in your family or your friendships or even your intimate partner, okay, I highly recommend that you reach out for support and guidance, because dealing with the narcissist is a very difficult task. It's not traditional the way that it needs to be handled. I hope this information has been helpful. Please subscribe to the channel, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.